Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky J. And I'm just stopping in on Monday to do a little Q&A podcast on account of there being fuck all going on. There were no fights last week. Well, I mean, there are always technically fights. If you want to see what fights are on, you can go and check with Kaposa, Grabaka Hitman on Twitter. He actually does an article each week. Just talking about what's going on that week, and there's normally like 9 or 10 events, even on a week like this, or last weekend. Levels Fight League was one that was being pushed to me quite heavily. But in terms of like big fights that people care about, fuck all. I mean, Nonito Donaire came back from 2 years off, having already been an old man, and kicked the shit out of some lad in boxing, that is. But otherwise, very tame weekend. And then this weekend coming, it's that event that we've been making fun of for a while with the 3 heavyweight slogs. But there are a lot of other good fights on there. Muslim Salikov versus Francisco Trinaldo. You got Sean Woodson versus Yusuf Salal. You got Alan Patrick versus Mason Jones. Tom Breeze versus Antonio Arroyo. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Miguel Baeza. Todorovic versus Rodriguez, Roman Delides versus Laureano Staropoli. Aside from the heavyweight fights, actually a banging card. So we're going to be talking about that on Thursday. We'll get real inside baseball on all the nerd shit about those nerd matchups, and I'll probably have to put Jairzinho Rosenstruck and Augusto Sakai in the headline and the thumbnail so that people click it, but, I'll probably half-ass talking about that one. If you missed what I did on Thursday, Friday last week, I published Advanced Striking 2.0 Dustin Poirier. It went down well. I really enjoyed writing it. It was one that I had a lot of fun with because he is such a strange story in mixed martial arts and striking generally. A man who made his entire career around the shift and then 25 fights in hit a wall. And then just learned to box overnight, and now still uses the shift, uses all kinds of weird stuff like pistol whipping people with the hammer fist from the clinch, but still has like one of the best jabs in MMA, which I know I say about everyone, but I mean it. So it came out really well. If you're a Patreon boy, or if you want to become a Patreon boy, you can go read that. But I thought today I'd just do some Q&A stuff. I asked you all to send in questions, and a lot of you did, and I'm going to answer a few of them now. Probably won't run very long today, but we'll get something done anyway. Got to keep pushing out the content, even when there is no content for me to enjoy and talk about. Hello, dearest Jack of Flaps. Writing into the Q&A poddy to ask your personal opinion of what may be a ploy at play in Paul Felder's post-fighting status. To clarify/update, recent news indicates that despite Paul Felder retiring from MMA competition, he has only dropped 2 spots in the lightweight rankings rather than being eliminated from the rankings entirely. This got me thinking, if a fighter is not fighting forever more, why would he be ranked at all? In a time where Paul Felder holds a win over the reigning champion, does he or the UFC anticipate he will return soon? Similar to his short notice fight with Dos Anjos, perhaps even in a title fight. Does Paul sincerely doubt himself enough that he couldn't beat Oliveira a second time? If a contender fell out of Oliveira's next bout, surely it would be a golden opportunity for Paul, if only to make a somewhat large check to support his family and not necessarily even win. Best regards, Caleb from Chicago. P.S. Speaking of terrible flaps, brackets as in Dom Cruz hand flaps. Who are your favourite examples of fighters who are terrible at one part of martial discipline like boxing, but simultaneously masterful at another aspect of it? Challenge: you cannot use Cruz, Luque, JDS, or competitors from last week's main event as an example, brackets Garbrandt and Font. Cheers from Caleb. Paul Felder, I didn't even talk about this. He retired on air. They were so stuck for stuff going on because a couple of finishes happened on the prelims and they were like, shit, we've got an hour to fill. So Paul Felder was like, oh, I'll retire for you. Obviously, Paul Felder, really fun fighter. Interesting guy because in a fighting sense, I feel like he kind of sums up the lightweight division in that it's just who you fight and when you fight them. So many of these guys could kill you or not, like on any given night. I mean, someone asked me how good Christian Lee actually is the other day, and I said, I think he's very good, But, there's people on the same thread saying, like, oh, he'd be top 15 in the UFC easily. And now, yeah, I mean, I could see a situation where he comes in, wins a fight, and is in the top 15. Michael Chandler came in, won a fight, is suddenly title contention. But would I consider him, like, one of the top 15 fighters in the world? There are a lot of people I would pick to give him a horrible matchup, but I think that's the case with almost anyone at lightweight. Because that's a division where, like, I mean, I said Trinaldo as an example, and everyone gets tired of me mentioning Trinaldo, but you've got people like, I mean, even like Leo Santos, who I don't consider, like, on the same level as Trinaldo, but just floating around in there without any ranking or recognition. Is Magulov a lightweight? Arman Sarukian. There's tons of them, guys who are barely regarded or don't have an official rank at lightweight, but on any given night, if they were given a chance at one of the top 15 or the top 10, they could probably crack it. Like Felder, they brought him in to beat Trinaldo when Trinaldo was on like an 8-fight winning streak, and they were like, we are not having a 40-year-old guy who can't speak a word of English fight for a UFC title. So they brought in Felder, and Trinaldo beat him, Felder was I feel like he had, like all lightweights, he had a lot of skills, but also like some big flaws, and I think he kind of outranked what his ability was. And you're seeing it with like the rank and name recognition being so closely linked. Like fucking Thiago Moises, nobody gave a shit about him. It's announced he's going to be fighting Islam Makhachev, and the 14 clowns who do the rankings were like, well, Thiago Moises is about number 15 ranked. Just like the difference was he booked a fight, and he just climbs up the rankings. Same thing with like fucking Dennis Seaver when he was going to fight Conor McGregor. It's dumb shit. Part of it is, it looks like nefariously manipulating the rankings, but it's also partly because the people who do the rankings are idiots who just think about like the names they've heard most recently. But inactivity in rankings is a really interesting question, because like there was no way when Rafael dos Anjos fought Paul Felder, that was Rafael dos Anjos fighting top 10 lightweight Paul Felder. Felder had been out for ages, was training for like a marathon or some shit, took the fight on short notice, and RDA beats him and is now in like the top 5. It's crazy. There are so many guys in that division I would pick to give Rafael dos Anjos a horrible fight. But Felder as a fighter, I really enjoyed him. I mean, I loved him from the first fight he had in the UFC, which was, I think, Danny Castillo. The one where he scored like one of 3 spinning back fist knockouts in the UFC ever at the time, which was crazy because everyone had been throwing them through the sprawl shorts generation. But if you remember that one, he's picking them off with like intercepting knees and stuff. It was really nice. I think the thing about Felder is like the more you saw of him, the more you realized he was he was identified as a striker, but really what he did well was hit people really hard. He really lacked in sort of the movement area of the game. And if you watch him against like Darren Cruikshank even, he's got the turning circle of the Ever Given. Cruikshank's darting off to the side, and Paul Felder is just like lumbering around and wandering onto side kicks as he turns to face him. But then you saw him in that little run of 3 that included Stevie Ray, Charles Oliveira, and someone else who I can't remember. But he just smashed 3 people back to back with like elbows from the clinch, elbows on the mat. He was a fantastically powerful dude. But if you watch the fights with like Hooker and RDA, just if the guy has any grasp on how movement works, he really does look lumbering. A lot of people thought he won that Hooker fight. I was not on his side for that one, but yeah, regarding the question of like fighting Charles Oliveira, it was quite interesting. He retired like a week after Duke Rufus jumped in to be on Facebook immediately after Charles Oliveira won the belt, being like, now's the time to do it. Get Paul Felder in there, the last man who beat Charles Oliveira. And you're like, Charles Oliveira has won something like 10 fights since then. But more than that, he's just a different fighter, and Paul Felder is at a different place in his career. Their first scrap was great fun, but I've always been against just like, here's a title fight for the title fight's sake. I mean, it's like the 2 Usman Masvidal title fights just didn't need them. And maybe some champions take it personally. Like if Conor McGregor had been a champion that actually hung around and defended a belt at all, he might have been like, get me Joe Duffy. But I can't see many actually caring that much. It's fighting. You win some, you lose some. Eventually, like, if you win enough, you get towards the belt. And if you don't win enough, you don't, And that's what separates classes of competition. Very few people are like, now I've got the belt, I want that guy I lost to on the regional scene. Bring me Dennis Hallman twice. Or Frank Shamrock versus John Lober, the rematch of that one. If a Charles Oliveira fight falls through and they get Paul Felder in on short notice, I will be like, what the fuck is this mess? Because, like, as much as people jizzed themselves over the RDA fight, it was very clear that the man wasn't ready for a professional fight. And RDA was, having been training for that for the last however long, and peaking through camp. You know, it's admirable to be able to step in like that, but it's also, I don't care. You know, it's. I feel like I have to say this too often, but I want to see the best in the world fight the best in the world with the best possible preparation to fight each other. I don't give a shit about like last minute replacements or, you know, there is something to be said for that. Like, I like a tournament where a guy has to show that he can last through the night and there's all sorts of crazy stuff that happens in the course of a tournament. But for the most part, no, I want people well prepared to fight each other because that's where you get the best fights. Also, getting Felder to replace whoever's fighting, or, you know, whoever's booked to fight Charles Oliveira, when there are so many other guys who are in position to replace him and would leap at the opportunity, is very far-fetched. Favourite examples of fighters who were terrible at one part of a martial arts discipline like boxing, but simultaneously masterful at another aspect of it? I mean, anyone like Damian Maia, you know. Actually, you know, Damian Maia, if you're talking like Dom Cruz in his hand flaps, you know, Dom Cruz is excellent at various bits of boxing, like footwork and ringcraft, and head movement, and very bad at the actual throwing of hands. If you are talking like that sort of, you know, you're good and bad in one slice of combat, you know, Damian Maia is a bad example of that, because Damian Maia, not only a world-class grappler, he has taught himself to wrestle pretty admirably. Better examples of that are people like, you know, so many guys who've tried to make a run in MMA based on their amazing jiu-jitsu accolades. The one I always think of is Andre Galvao, who, like, very early on in his Strikeforce career ran into Tyron Woodley, and Tyron Woodley basically retired him, because what are you going to do? If you're the world's best guard passer and top player, but you can't take the guy down, what are you going to do? But then that's the same sort of frustration that you feel when you watch someone who is an amazingly powerful puncher but can't actually cut the opponent off, like Jeremy Stevens, you know, just watching them wander around the ring, being like, oh, that was close, you know, and every time the commentators say that, you go, yeah, but it didn't hit him. And if 90% of the times you're saying that was close, you know, it wasn't really that close. Anyway, cheers, Caleb. Hello, Jack. In the recent bout between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler, oh, we're big on Oliveira today, Chandler used his ape-shit athleticism and speed to successfully blitz down Oliveira and nearly capped it off. That being said, very shortly after the second round began, Chandler had very clearly slowed down. No bounce in his stance and generally more laboured look to his actions. He was finished shortly after. I bring this up to highlight Michael Chandler's unique style that I would equate to pulling the lever on a slot machine. In Chandler's recent run in the UFC, he seems to fight with a blatant disregard for defense and energy management in exchange for more effective and intense offense. Of course, he uses his few clean techniques to hedge his bet, but it seems like he's all in on the first round. This style is obviously not unique to Chandler, as many a regional black explosive wrestler would attest to, but he has made it work far better than it does for the aforementioned. I might be dense, but I can't work out who. Are we talking about Woodley? Why do you think that is? And more importantly, how well do you think it will work against the top 5 or so of that ever-stacked lightweight division? Tremendous work on the Patreon. Cheers for an eternity of jacking it with slag from G. Going to be sore from an eternity of that. But, yeah, Chandler, I mean, I think there is still sort of a misunderstanding about what Chandler does. I do think, obviously, he slowed down because he spent a lot of energy trying to finish Oliveira in the first round, but he came out for the second round and did exactly the same things he did in the first. I feel like he can, you know, he probably felt that he himself could go the full 5 rounds and keep throwing and keep doing things. But if you watch his Bellator career, every second fight he'll score an amazing knockout, and then the other one he'll do a decision, you know. And like it's guys like Brent Primus, Goto Yamauchi, not amazing fighters. And what Chandler does is, like, after the first round of, as he said, apeshit athleticism, he really does take his breaks. And you saw that too in the Oliveira fight. He's very good at pushing people to the fence from the closed guard and just turning over short elbows and chilling there. And that's what he did against Goto Yamauchi. He did it at points against Primus. He does it to everyone, but like he finds ways to take breaks. And I think people expect him to be like this murderer all the time and anything he touches you with will kill you. But yes, there is a degree of slowing down. He's much more dangerous in the first round than he is in the other rounds. And once he's like, if he can't catch the guy by surprise, because so much of his game is speed rather than like setups, if he can't catch the guy by surprise, his fights tend to get a little bit boring. You know, he ends up like, oh, I'm going to lay on this dude. With the exception of like the Benson Henderson fight, which was a banger all the way through. But that was mainly due to Benson Henderson just being able to take a horrendous beating and then keep the energy really high throughout. I think it was the Heavy Hands boys said like Michael Chandler has a level of athleticism that is like tearing his body apart. But yeah, I mean it's true. Like the man is incredibly fast. There are bits of substance, like technical style to his game, which everyone and their mum did like a video breakdown of that Dan Hooker fight. But more than anything, he's very, very fast. That's the thing that catches so many of these guys off guard. He's short and he covers distance very, very quickly for a guy that short. And, you know, hitting hard is one thing, but the fact that he lands his right hand like clean, just straight through people's guards, that's more speed than anything. With the top five, versus the top 5 of the division, I think it'd be very interesting to see if there's anyone smart enough to like drag him into longer fights. That lead leg is always out there for punting. So, he's talking about the Gaethje fight right now, and Gaethje obviously, even in his more boxing-centric form, still uses that low kick constantly. It's interesting because you can get to the top 10 of a division on your raw talent and not actually doing anything clever. I think Michael Chandler is going to be the equivalent of a more dangerous Jeremy Stephens, where if you really use your noggin and you are world-class, you can beat him reliably. But if you are world-class and you don't, agree to fight in a slightly smarter way, you're going to have a real hard time. Tell you what would be interesting, him versus Fiziev, because Fiziev loves his left hook and his left high kick and his left body kick, and all of that is stuff that you would probably, like Chandler opening up with the right straight to the body constantly, that's the big openings on that right side of his body. I think that'd be fun. And also you get to see how Fiziev deals with a guy who can just like double leg a horse. But that's sort of like bottom end of the top 15, Fiziev. I believe, should be. Cheers, G. Jack, sometimes you tweet about your favourite instructionals from BJJ Fanatics, but have you got any favourites from their sister websites, Dynamic Striking, Fanatic Wrestling, Judo Fanatics, and the ugly, hairless twin they keep in the shed, Effective Self-Defense? I didn't even know they had a site called Effective Self-Defense. Another question. There are currently 7 blocked Filthy Casuals guide videos. Have you ever thought about uploading this and other block content for the Patreon boys? We're funding your all-in on Coca shenanigans. I think we deserve it. From Alon. The Patreon. I don't put videos on the Patreon. All my video work is... I believe that my work, video-wise, counts as fair use, and I try to act that way by not, like, selling them for profit or anything like that. I am using someone's material to make analytical videos that I put up, and I don't even have an AdSense account, so I don't make a penny from them. I mean, I get attention from them, which is nice for, like, the podcast, but no, I don't make a penny from the Filthy Casuals guides, and I actually don't want to. I think I'm being whiter than white with my fair use stuff, and I think it's important that I keep that the case. I know that some guys do Patreon videos, but I've just never felt comfortable with it because of my fair use argument. Instructionals. Now this is an important one because I've been saying I'm going to do this forever, and the lovely guys at BJJ Fanatics have given me the keys to the kingdom, and I've been watching all their instructionals and being like, I will talk about these at some point. I'm gonna reel off some of my absolute favorites. I've watched probably over 100 now. Dipped in and out of. I haven't watched every single bit of 100, but I know one's good if I watch the whole thing. But there are a few that I'm going to shout out right now. Firstly, the boy who opened up BJJ Fanatics for me, Craig Jones. If you didn't see his match, well, I said nothing happened last weekend, but Mikey Musumeci and Craig Jones, both heel-hooked dudes in like 60 seconds flat at Who's Number One, WNO, the Flow Grappling event. And Craig Jones did it against Luis Panzer, who is an actual heavyweight, training partner of Buchecha, and also, like, in the gi, known for his amazing leg locks. And Craig Jones just heel-hooked him in 60 seconds with, like, a 30-pound weight disadvantage. But Craig Jones did a instructional called Systematic Submission Dilemmas, which is, like, going from low posture attacks, like the triangle and the omoplata and so on, to high posture attacks when the opponent stands. Half the modern... leg locking battle is getting the opponent to stand up so you can get underneath his legs, or lifting him with like a butterfly sweep so you can get under his legs. That's a really interesting instructional. But Craig's most recent one, which is about the anti-wrestling game, I think is probably the most interesting for people who are grappling for MMA. Because one of the interesting things about like ADCC is that the rule set is a little bit more wrestling-centric. Like, and I'm going to get this wrong, because like I watched a Q&A with Keenan Cornelius where he was talking about the rules of ADCC. He was like, I've been there 3 times and I don't really understand the rules. But in ADCC, you can nullify points for a takedown by turning to the turtle, which makes it even more wrestling-centric because now you've got guys playing to get to their hands and knees and get back up. But this new Craig Jones instruction is just about how, like, if someone's down on their elbows in a turtle, you know, they've got their hands free to fight chokes and stuff, but they can't get up. Whereas the problem that a lot of the guys are dealing with now with guys like Nicky Rod, who's a training partner of Craig Jones, coming in, is that guys will get up on their hands and just either sucker drag or peel the hand off and stand or elbow pass out of the front headlock. You know, keeping someone like Nicky Rod down when he's in like all fours is going to be almost impossible. Well, I mean, like we were talking about with Kelvin Gastelum the other day, he would prefer you to pass his guard than stay in his guard, because once he passes his guard, he can go to his belly and get up to his hands and knees and stand. So those are brilliant. Neil Melanson, anything by him I've been raving about for ages, but his tactical turtle is awesome. If you can't tell, I really like the turtle, but just like that is, again, wrestling stuff in a BJJ context or wrestling into BJJ. Couple of great ones sort of following that theme. Wrestling Up by Andrew Wiltsey and Wrestling Up by Dante Leon. And they're two really different sort of guys, because Andrew Wiltsey is he just basically does just wrestle off his butt. And Dante Leon is all about like inverting underneath people and then coming up on the single leg when that fails. The Skarbowski DVDs, I don't think I rave about those every week. It's really interesting stuff because he's a guy who had good success as like a foreigner fighting Thais, and then he decided, actually, no, my style gets me hit too much. I'm going to try and fight a little bit more like the Thais. And so he has all these like interesting little tips like kick for the wrist, don't just with the foot, not with the shin, do things to keep the other guy off balance. Not everything is about knocking him out. Everything by Lachlan Giles is great. I haven't actually watched his new K-Guard one, but I've got it sitting there ready to watch. Pat Downey's stuff on wrestling is great. If you missed it, they did a little wrestling match between him and Gordon Ryan, and he got a technical victory in like 11 seconds or something like that. Andrew Wiltsey's buzzsaw passing is fantastic. If you've not seen Wiltsey in competition, buzzsaw is the correct phrase. He just goes at you from minute 1 until the end of the match. Thinking about more striking stuff, Dwayne Ludwig's got a few things out. His low kicking series is really good. He's got one on kicking the lead leg and one on kicking the back leg. I think most people learn how to kick the lead leg pretty well, but the back leg one's good fun. And, kicking the back leg is something that I've always enjoyed, but I don't have a whole ton of setups for it. You know, if you could go to it more effectively, more often, getting low kick TKOs against people who should be unlow kick TKOable. Greg Jackson's done a couple on the art and science of ground and pound, and he did one on like combative principles, and it's all a bit sort of like a business presentation. You know, he's a very weird sort of guy with his principles and his ideas, but you know, he was the heart and soul of that team, and basically his like taking less interest in MMA and more interest in like combatives and stuff and teaching law enforcement, it coincided with Jackson Wink not having all the champions and stuff anymore. And, you know, the fallout with people like Diego Sanchez, Donald Cerrone, all those guys who left. I mean, everyone knows that Danaher's stuff is terrific. I really enjoyed the Modolfo ADCC camp sparring sessions, which was just like sparring footage of the guys training for the ADCC, like all the top US competitors, and I think Craig Jones was there too. It was a bit weird because like they filmed all this sparring footage, and Kanan Duarte, who was in the weight class above Gordon Ryan, turned up, was like, yeah, you can film me, and then apparently decided after the sparring that he didn't want to be on the DVD, which leads everyone to believe that, well, I mean, everyone who was there says that Gordon was just handling him, but it was a bit weak to like turn up for the thing and then be like, no, I'm not letting you film me retroactively. But those are really fun to watch, that stuff. Anything by the Ruotolo, I think they're twins. Yeah, twins, really good. They got a leg trapping system, which you can see whichever one was at ADCC the other year using against good competitors. And anything on guard passing is really interesting at the moment because guard passing at ADCC, basically no one can do it. I'm thinking of guys who like successfully guard passed consistently. Ruotolo had a decent success, especially as a guy who was like 16 when he came in. But basically, Gordon is the only guy who can reliably pass guards at the moment. And that's a huge part of why he murders everyone. When I say reliably pass guards, I mean reliably pass like world-class guards. Everything by Jake McKenzie on the half guard is great if you're, if you're deep into like a half guard for jiu-jitsu, as opposed to like half guard for MMA. Or no gi, specifically gi stuff. His stuff plays. I mean, a lot of it's good for no gi too, but like in a competitive jiu-jitsu grappling scenario, that sort of stuff is really good. Nicholas Merigali did a series on his Deep De La Riva, which again we talked about. Speaking of Charles Oliveira and Paul Felder, Charles Oliveira used the Deep De La Riva against or the De La Riva X, whatever you want to call it, against Paul Felder, and in that Filthy Casuals guide, which is still up, so you can go watch it, I used the example of Nicholas Merigali, and I used a specific example of him sweeping Felipe Pena with it. Marcelo's guard passing system is fantastic. Again, like he was one of the very few guys who could routinely pass world-class guards. I kind of like guys who haven't had a lot of attention because they, the thing that John Danaher should have taught everyone is that like a guy not being a world-class competitor doesn't mean that he won't produce some at some point. So I quite like all the weird like catch wrestling stuff. Like there's a blackout hybrid cradle system by Dave Petroni, which I found interesting. Ryan Hall on his actually I should shout out Ryan Hall because he's not on Fanatics, but he does have his own website where you can get his instructionals, and they are very, very good. They are probably top 1% of instructionals I've ever watched. And he has been into the cradle lately and using it to set stuff up. Paul Schreiner, everything by Paul Schreiner is excellent, and Paul Schreiner was a coach of Ryan Hall, and Ryan Hall constantly shouts out Paul Schreiner. And again, Paul Schreiner, he was a decent competitor, but not the level of a lot of the guys who he now teaches, like Matthias Deniz, Ryan Hall. It just shows like some of these guys, it just never comes together on competition day, and some guys just aren't like amazing athletes in their own right, but can still have the principles and the ideas and stuff to train guys who are better than them. Gordon Ryan's stuff is all amazing, but like his I would say his half guard and his attack in the back series, or attack in the turtle series rather, half guard and attack in the turtle are his best instructionals, I would say, because you get most of his guard information on the half guard, because most of his guard stuff comes from either like the opponent standing against him and him engaging them, or him being in half guard. So if you get the half guard set, you'll probably understand most of what he does, like out at shin to shin distance. And if you get the attack in the turtle series, that's the stuff that people in BJJ tend to be pretty bad at. There's this attitude that like once the opponent turtles, they're done. And really, like the more people learn to wrestle and the more people learn to use the turtle, the less that seems to be true. And again, Gordon Ryan murders people from the turtle. He always gets his hooks in, always gets his power half. What else is good? Morgan Charrier has an interesting little striking series, which I think is quite cheap too. Sanchez is on there, and like his stuff is really like there's no basically. I mean, it's all in Thai and subtitled, but there's no like overlap between what Sanchez does and what normal striking coaches teach. It's all very Sanchez, or Sanchez, however you say his name. Nicholas Renier has some interesting stuff on Luta Livre. He's a guy who teaches in Paris, and I think he trained under, is it Roberto Letao, the Luta Livre master. Everything by Bernardo Ferrer is interesting, but I really liked his single strap back take DVD. But again, that's a gi thing, so if you're not a gi person, don't do that. The Machida stuff, there's a lot of Machida instructionals. I think the Kazushi, the foot sweeps one was probably the most interesting to me. I've still not watched Dean Thomas's ground game blueprint, but that's supposed to be very good, so I'm going to check that out. High step guard passing by Mike Perez was good. That's something you don't see a lot, like whipping his leg out of the De La Riva and trying to backstep over people. Flavio Canto has a whole series on the Canto Strangle, which is something that you used to just hear like Keenan and Ryan Hall and people mention and be like, I really like it, and then you go and watch a highlight of Flavio Canto murdering people with it in judo and not teaching it. So actually, that's a really good little series. I think I said Zach Esposito's series on the Esposito, his series on the single leg is one of my favorites. Dan Valimont did an amazing series on the high crotch, which I really liked. Kyle Boehm did a very interesting one on like the defending submissions from the overtime positions in like EBI rules. But I was slagging off EBI rules the other day because I was watching. It was I think it's Mason Fowler. Like he's great. He's got wins over like Craig Jones and a number of other good people. But if you look through his like no-gi grappling record going back to 2018, he's never submitted anyone. He's always won on overtime or points or advantages or DQ. And then the tarantula guy, I almost called it Tarantula, like fucking OSW. But the tarantula guard by Dominic Bell is brilliant. The footwork blueprint by Trevor Whitman and Justin Gaethje is terrific. And I loved Ankle Picks from Everywhere by Brian Pearsall. So that's all my favourites so far. And I will get back to studying the rest of that shit and telling what's good. But I think I've given you a lot of. I was surprised how many I really liked there, because I was gonna not mention any ones that I didn't think were as good as my favorites, and I think I mentioned like 25 different ones there. So lots to be going on with. Oi oi, slackest of jacks. I was watching Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega and noticing the many taunts and jokes Max makes mid-fight. Many other fighters, like Anderson Silva and Prince Nazim, were also always joking in the cage or ring. But they were counter fighters and Max is a pressure fighter. It got me thinking. Please could you share with us, mere boys of this beautiful podcast, why would a pressure fighter or any other fighter that doesn't fight mostly on counters taunt mid-fight? Please comment with the benefits and drawbacks of taunting mid-fight. Is taunting something you can train to get better at? Cheers from Eric. The main advantage is that it makes for good highlights and good clips on the internet. And also, this is just like who Max Holloway is. You know, I don't think he was a dick about it at any point. But if you watch his fight with Dustin Poirier, even when he's getting lumped up in the first 2-3 rounds, they're still talking to each other the entire time. It's just gamesmanship, you know. And I think that's the difference between like a lot of very good fighters and sort of like lesser fighters. You know, there are guys. I mean, you know, McGregor, if he gets hit in the face, you know, I don't think it undoes him. You know. These guys who come out talking and smack talking and things like that, obviously the point is to like either demoralize you or just work you up or just have fun with it. But if you like then get upset on the other end of that when the opponent hits you, you've got problems. You know, that's the difference between like an amateur or like a low-level fighter and a decent one. The ability to get hit in the face and be like, yeah, no, we're in a fist fight. It's nothing personal. You know, like the whole world. I mean, maybe if you're taunting when the guy punches you in the face, that might make it the rounds on the internet. But most people in fighting are not, you know, at the highest levels, are not afraid of being shown like getting knocked out on Twitter. You know, like Ben Askren, you know, did not give a shit, and he has a very healthy and fun attitude about that Masvidal knockout, or the Jake Paul one. You know, immediately afterwards he was like, "Yeah, no, I should be embarrassed. I got knocked out by Jake Paul. It sucks." But I don't think a lot of these guys really care, like at that level, if they get hit in the face. I think a lot of it is gamesmanship. I think it's partly to like loosen up so you're not feeling tense and you can keep going. Partly because it excites fans and it gets like engagement and helps your name. You know, it's a lot more like Max Holloway. You can do the Fedor thing or the Igor Vovchanchyn thing of just going forward and never like allowing the opponent to see any emotion, but it's very hard to catch on like that. You know, Igor Vovchanchyn and Fedor caught on because they were the best. Like, if a guy was in the middle of the card just murdering people and not saying anything, like, I mean, look how hard Vicente Luke's had to work. He's been murdering people, but he doesn't have like any personality at all, so people don't care. The old closed mouth don't get fed or whatever it is, you know? Like, people are always talking about Dylan Dallas. He's done nothing of note in MMA, but he's got people talking about him. Regards to like fighting style, yeah, like taunting as a counter fighter will work if you can get the opponent coming at you, but I think we're getting to a stage where that's not true. You know, I mean, it will always be true at a certain stage, a certain level, but, and I'm going to talk about this with my Muslim Salikov Filthy Casuals guide that I'm going to be doing this week, but at a certain point, to get on the counter, you have to lead. And if you're not leading and you're just going like, hey, you know, taunt, people are very aware of what you're doing. And they'll look at like your head and pretend to swing and then kick you in the leg, or look at your leg and kick you in the head. And like they're not going to give you Forrest Griffin versus Anderson Silva, Dan Henderson versus Anderson Silva, everyone versus Anderson Silva. Here I come, very obvious leads. So yeah, I don't know if it has like a particularly practical application. I mean, like, McGregor is also, he's sort of like a pressure fighter, sort of like a counter fighter, but like he goes forward and he kicks people in the body and then taunts them. It's part of it might be to wear on people, but I think part of it is just that's who you are. Speaking of the Poirier versus Holloway fight, there's a great moment where they step away from each other and Dustin, they've been smack talking each other and hitting each other upside the head, and then Dustin like spits out a load of blood, but doesn't turn his head away first. And I think it's Herb Dean reckon goes, "Hey, don't spit blood at him." And there's like this really funny moment where they're both like, "No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spit it at you." And Max Holloway's like, "No, don't worry, I understand." And they get back to like punching 7 bells out of each other. Just like the idea of accidentally being rude to your opponent, not in the way that you usually are, like that you agree to both smack talk each other. And I always mention it, but a call back to Eddie Bravo. Like if you watch the second Hoyler match, he like smack talked people because he said like his words on the Rogan podcast, which is a really good episode by the way, were he would rather fight against someone who was laughing than someone who was angry at him. But then if you train at a good gym, like, dudes are smack talking each other all the time, and there's never any hard feelings about it. It's just, it's funny, And I think if I ever like do open my own gym or whatever, I think Sakuraba had it right. He called his gym Laughter 7 because he felt like laughter was a key element to actually getting good at anything. Cheers, Eric. Hey Jack, huge fan of the podcast and especially your video analysis since I'm a dumb boy who learns visually. Question, what other MMA media do you watch / listen to for analysis, podcasts, YouTube channels, or is it just Diego Sanchez's OnlyFans page for you? Keep up the great work, Gabriel. Oh, I think it was BJJ Scout put up a thing, and I think he bought like the OnlyFans page because he had a load of Joshua Fabia, Diego Sanchez content. It was very funny. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. I think it's on his B channel. Yeah, I mean, as much as I'm loath to bring more attention to the Diego Sanchez, Joshua Fabia situation, it was pretty funny. Other media that I shout out the Heavy Hands boys fairly often. I occasionally read a Fight Site article. I love the CMA podcast, the co-main event with Ben Fox and Chad Dundas. I used to really enjoy the MMA beat from time to time, but obviously that dropped off the face of the earth once they all went their separate ways and MMA fighting stopped being like the powerhouse of MMA coverage. I think that might be it. That's basically what I do in the MMA sphere. I kind of like when you're working in it. Oh, and I watch Luke Thomas and occasionally more Morning Combat. But I enjoy other people's analysis, but I don't like... leaf blower outside. 1 second while I go and punch him. Right, I'm back and he caught these hands. What was I saying? Yeah, no, I don't like to read or watch or listen to other people's analysis if I'm about to write something on a fight or a fighter. Maybe it's the ex-academic in me being like, oh, I'm scared of accidentally plagiarizing someone. But more than that, it's like, my value, I think, to listeners is like what I see when I look at a fight. And I know that what I see is different to what other people see. And they have their own value in what they see in a fight, based on like what you've trained, what you do, what you're into at the moment. Like at the moment, I'm really into kicking, leading with kicks and following with punches rather than the other way around. So I'm seeing that everywhere. But like, if I consume someone else's analysis first, and then I go and do my research for that weekend's fights, and I start writing my thing, it's gonna be coloured by what that person has said and what I've listened to previously. So I tend to leave listening to other people's analysis like after I've done whatever I'm doing for the week, and then if I want to get hyped for the fights myself, I listen to someone else's analysis. One of the good things about like the CME is that it's not like technical analysis, it's just funny. It's a curse, it's a curse having to do this job. It's not at all. It's an absolute joy. But it's interesting because you're like, I want to hear what everyone else is doing, firstly because I'm interested in their views, and there are a lot of interesting guys out there doing analysis and talking about fights. But then you're like, what if I hear a feature of their show that I really think would be a great idea and I can't just take it, Yeah, so to recap, Heavy Hands, occasional fight size stuff, CME, Luke Thomas, occasional Morning Combat. The Fighter and the Kid subreddit is good fun to get your Reader's Digest copy of the Fighter and the Kid. Yeah, that's about it. Oh, and I think I use Tapology for most of my like upcoming fight research stuff. Just to who's on it, what's their record like, what have they done before this if they've not been in the UFC. Yeah, that's about it. Cheers, Gabriel. Hey there, Jack. Hope this email finds you well. I want to first start by saying that I find your content real good, mate. I first came across your YouTube while watching boxing footage, and I haven't stopped following since. Which leads me to my first question. I always hear you moan about the Bellator commentary crew, which in all fairness fucking sucks. And I'm intrigued to hear what you think of modern day boxing commentary, and how it ranks against Bellator and the UFC. I've caught a few BT Sports boxing matches, and I didn't really have an opinion on them. But I've never liked the HBO guys, save for Big George and Roy Jones, and I can't stand the Dazen crew. On a more serious note, in light of the success of more traditional strikers, Rob Whittaker, Wonderboy, etc., are there aspects of the traditional martial arts that are not being exploited in MMA? I say this because researching karate and training with more old school boxing trainers, that there's like a monk-like obsession with maintaining and protecting an imaginary center line from the top of your head to the bottom of your torso, hence the bladed stances and the Philly shell, whereas your average MMA striker even today stands pretty square. I hope I don't regurgitate too much of your Anderson Silva piece back to you. Also, will us filthy Americans ever get a casual guide to British slang and references, or a Sakuraba Part 2? Sincerest regards from California, and Hasbullah bless from Guillermo. Cheers, Guillermo. Oh, you made me feel bad about Sakuraba too. It's one that's always on the back burner. Like, it's just I'm working out how to do it best. Because I had a lot of fun doing the number one, the first Sakuraba series. Because basically, I think I'd taken a little break from Filthy Casuals guides, and I decided I'm going to learn to do some fucking visual stuff. So I did a ton of motion graphics and shit for that Sakuraba guide, and I sort of dropped away from that after the Tony Ferguson one. I'd quite like to go back to doing that for the Sakuraba series, making them look real nice, but I haven't yet. Right, first question was boxing commentary. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not as egregious to me because like MMA commentary has gone the route of like, because Rogan was such an effective hype man, now everyone has to shout "oh" all the time. Like in The Sopranos when someone says something offensive. But, I think that the thing that is hacking me off at the moment most is the filming of the desk. Like when there is a knockout, you are expected to bug your eyes and slap your head and jump up and go, "oh!" Because literally every time there's a finish, they now cut to slow-mo of the desk. It must be fucking exhausting. Because like even if you're going, "oh, Jack, you old cynic, maybe they just love MMA that much." At a certain point, you are going to have to act to do that because it's your job to be there. It's not... No one reacts that way to every single knockout and finish. But anyway, yeah, boxing commentary crews. Do you know what? I was always pleasantly surprised by Paulie Malignaggi. I thought he was surprisingly good and surprisingly not Paulie Malignaggi. Loved Roy Jones. Big George was always fun. He did sort of have I'm the biggest Prince Nazim fan of all, but he did have like a massive boner for anyone who could hit. To be honest, like, I don't know. Maybe it's because it's harder to just be like egregiously wrong in boxing. Or maybe it's because there's the expectation to actually talk about the match. But I've never found boxing commentary crews to be as egregious as MMA ones generally. Traditional martial arts, yeah, well, but with the bladed versus square stuff, that's partly to do with wrestling as well. Obviously, it's easier to sprawl on something or snatch a leg out of a single leg or high crotch attempt if your hips are more square to begin with. Also easier to shoot a takedown if your hips are more square. Very hard to shoot a takedown from like side on. But one of the things that I think is probably going to catch on at some point, I mean, I mentioned it earlier with my instructional picks, but foot sweeps again, foot sweeps and unbalances against boxing. If you watch like Machida versus BJ Penn, Machida versus that Japanese lad who was high at the time, can't remember his name. Sweeping people's lead foot as they step onto it, and it's not even like a sweep. A sweep is like sole of the foot brushing across. It's like a little a reap, I suppose. You use the top. So if you're southpaw versus orthodox, the opponent steps in with their jab or whatever. You keep your foot outside theirs, you hook your ankle behind theirs, and you pull it out as they're stepping in. And he did that to BJ Penn. Machida did it to a number of people. But it's such a great way to get someone off their feet. And if they bounce up, you try and kick them in the head when they're doing it. And it's just like it's timing based, zero effort takedowns. It's like that and the cut kick that I think really more fighters should be using, because actually fighting to get someone off their feet is hard work if they're giving you an easy sweep. That's very little work at all. Cheers, Guillermo. Right, this dude will not stop mowing his lawn, and I've gone about an hour, so I'm going to call it there. But we'll be back on Wednesday to talk about the fights coming up this weekend. Like I said, actually lots of good ones. If you want to get in on the Patreon, read the Advanced Striking 2.0 Dustin Poirier and Tommy Loughran, which we did a couple of weeks before, and all the others. Get in on that, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to see what I'm writing at anytime, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, I will continue to answer them. jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Biting your hand off for a Jairzinho Rozenstruik main event. Bless.